The room beneath Cormorant Pier had been built so visitors could watch the sea without getting wet. On the night Gideon Thorne died, the sea came in anyway. Before we begin, please remember that this story is a work of fiction. All characters and events are fictitious, and any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The first person to see Gideon was not a detective. It was a cleaner named Elsie Marr, who had been told to polish the handrail before the press arrived. At 6:30 on a Thursday morning, Elsie descended the spiral stairs below Cormorant Pier with a bucket in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. The storm had passed before dawn, but the old pier still trembled whenever a heavy swell struck its pilings. Bolts clicked inside the walls. Water sighed in pipes. Somewhere beneath her feet, pumps labored to keep the blue vault dry. The attraction had not yet opened to the public. That was supposed to happen at noon, with photographers, council members, and Gideon Thorne cutting a blue ribbon while the tide rose behind the new glass. Elsie reached the lower landing and stopped. A line of water had crept beneath the steel door. She set down her bucket. The water touched the toe of her shoe and folded around it, cold and clear. At first, she assumed a pipe had failed. Then she noticed the bolt indicator above the handle. Red meant engaged. The door was bolted from the inside. She knocked. "Mr. Thorne?" The pumps answered with a low mechanical throb. Elsie knocked again, harder. "Is anyone in there?" Beyond the door, something struck glass with a soft, irregular tap. Tap. Pause. Tap. She ran upstairs. By 7, Cormorant Pier had been closed from shore to end. Uniformed officers stood behind temporary barriers while gulls wheeled over the roof and shouted into the wind. Firefighters forced the Blue Vault's door and released a shallow wave that rushed across the landing. Gideon Thorne lay on his side near the eastern viewing window. He wore a dinner jacket beneath a waterproof coat, as if he had dressed for 2 different evenings and trusted neither. One hand was curled against his chest, the other drifted in the water. A dark bruise marked the back of his head. Fine threads of blood had dried in his silver hair, stiff as varnish. The sharp smell in the room was not the sea, it was hot metal and wet plaster. On the glass beside Gideon's face, a single pale scrap of skin had caught against a chipped edge. Arden Pike saw that detail in a photograph 3 hours later. She had not taken the photograph. She had given up crime scene work 18 months earlier after a motorway collision involving a family she knew. Since then, she'd returned to Harker's Cove, rented 2 rooms over a shuttered bakery, and accepted small jobs photographing houses, fishing boats, and weddings where everyone promised to remain friends. That Thursday morning, she was taking pictures of storm damage for an insurance company when Inspector Bram Hales found her on the promenade. Bram was broad-shouldered, rain-polished, and permanently apologetic about being in a hurry. He had known Arden since school and had spent most of that time asking favors as if they were medical emergencies. "You still have your old forensic lenses?" he asked. "No, you do. They are in a locked case." "That is a yes with furniture around it." Arden lowered her camera. Beyond him, blue lights flashed at the entrance to Cormorant Pier. "Who?" "Gideon Thorne." She looked again at the pier. "Accident?" "Maybe, except the room was bolted from inside, the emergency hatch was sealed, and Dr. Price says he probably died before the water reached him." "Then not an accident." "That is why I need eyes I trust. You have a scenes unit." Coming from inland, the storm closed the eastern road. 4 hours, perhaps 5. Arden disliked the small spark of interest that moved through her. She had spent months trying to live without that spark. Bram held out a sealed evidence suit. "One look. Your one looks have always lasted all day. This one may last until lunch. That is not better." But she took the suit. The Blue Vault had been advertised as an engineering miracle. In reality, it felt like the inside of an expensive coffin. The chamber sat below the pier's main deck, partly beneath the waterline at high tide. 3 thick acrylic windows faced the harbor. Pumps, drains, and emergency seals were concealed behind dark blue wall panels. Benches curved around a central display plinth where a restored brass diving helmet would stand for the opening ceremony. When Arden entered, most of the water had been pumped out. The floor remained slick. Gideon's body had been removed, but its position was marked with white tape. Dr. Anwen Price crouched beside the eastern window, examining the chipped section. Anwen glanced up. "I wondered how long it would take Bram to drag you back." "He promised lunch. He lies under pressure. So do most suspects. Anwen's expression softened. You all right? No, but I am here. That was enough between them. Arden photographed the room from the doorway. The interior bolt was simple, a steel bar sliding into a wall socket. Firefighters had bent it when they forced entry. No string, wire, magnet, or obvious device was attached. The emergency hatch in the ceiling was secured by 2 dog clamps and painted over around the edges. Dust lay unbroken along its frame. The obvious question was how a murderer had left. Arden began with a different one. Why is there salt on the floor? Bram looked down. Because the room filled with seawater. No, look near the display plinth. A pale fan of crystals marked the dark flooring. Water had dissolved part of it, but a dry ridge remained beneath the plinth slip. Anwen touched a gloved fingertip to the deposit. Coarse salt. Sea salt? Bram asked. Perhaps, but it was here before the flooding. Water has undercut the edge. Arden moved closer to the plinth. A circular velvet mount waited for the antique diving helmet. Beside it were 4 square recesses, only 3 of which contained objects: a lead line, a brass pressure gauge, and a knife with a corroded sheath. The 4th recess was empty. What belongs there? Arden asked. Bram checked the exhibit inventory. A 19th century diving weight, brass shell, lead core, 6 kilograms. Missing? It was logged yesterday afternoon. Anwen stood. Heavy enough to cause the head injury. Arden studied the empty recess. A few grains of black grit clung to the velvet, and valuable enough to be noticed. Bram's radio crackled. An officer reported that 6 people had been on the pier after closing. Gideon had hosted a private rehearsal for the opening ceremony. Present were his daughter, Livia Thorne, his solicitor and oldest friend, Silas Vane, Harbormaster Rowan Dacre, marine biologist Dr. Juniper Shaw, journalist Felix Quill, and the pier's heritage conservator, Maeve Calder. 6 suspects, Arden thought, and 1 locked room that was trying too hard to be impossible. They gathered the 6 in the Salt Glass Hotel, Gideon's grand Edwardian property overlooking the harbor. Its ballroom had become an improvised interview suite. Rain crawled down tall windows. Staff whispered behind closed doors. Above the fireplace hung an oil portrait of Gideon at 40, younger and leaner, one hand resting on a rolled set of plans as if he had personally designed the horizon. Livia Thorne sat nearest the fire. She was 34, sharp-featured, and dressed in the same black trousers and cream blouse she had worn the previous evening. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were not still. Felix Quill stood by the window, taking notes until Bram confiscated his pen. Felix was a compact man with restless eyebrows and the incurable confidence of someone who believed all closed doors existed for his benefit. Rowan Dacre remained near the ballroom entrance. Wind and salt had carved his face into hard planes. His harbormaster's sweater smelled faintly of diesel. Dr. Juniper Shaw sat alone at a small table. She wore sea-green glasses and kept her silver-streaked hair tied with a strip of blue cloth. Her gaze moved around the room not nervously but analytically, as if everyone were an unfamiliar species. Silas Vane occupied the sofa beneath Gideon's portrait. He was 63, elegant, controlled, and gray from collar to cuff. He had been Gideon's solicitor for 38 years and his friend for longer. Maeve Calder stood beside a display cabinet of maritime china. She was 41, with copper-brown skin, dark curls pinned untidily at her neck, and a fresh scrape across one knuckle. Unlike the others, she watched Arden's camera rather than Arden. Bram began with the facts. Gideon was last seen in the pier's upper reception room after the rehearsal. The group had argued. People left in different directions. At some point, Gideon descended to the blue vault. By morning, he was dead inside a bolted chamber that had partially flooded. Partially? Livia said. The police told me he drowned. No one told you that, Bram replied. Then why was there water? That is one of the questions. Felix folded his arms. And the answer may be that Thorne ignored warnings about the structure. Again. Silas looked at him. A man is dead. A man who made money from unsafe buildings is dead in one of his unsafe buildings. The symmetry is difficult to ignore. Rowan stepped forward, but Bram raised a hand. Arden watched Maeve. At the word symmetry, Maeve's jaw tightened. Bram interviewed them separately. Arden sat in, saying little, listening for the moments when each person stopped answering the question and began answering the fear behind it. Livia went first. She admitted arguing with her father. Gideon had planned to sell the Salt Glass Hotel to an overseas investment group. Livia managed the hotel and had spent 6 years restoring it from near bankruptcy. He called it sentiment, she said. I called it the only thing our family had not turned into scaffolding and debt. Did you threaten him? Bram asked. I told him I would challenge the sale. With what grounds? Undue influence, incapacity, fraud if necessary. Was he incapable? No, he was perfectly capable of ruining everyone. She left the pier shortly after 10 with Silas. Hotel cameras showed her entering the lobby 12 minutes later. She claimed she went directly to her rooms and spoke to no one. Arden asked, Did your father tie his own shoes? Livia blinked. What? His dress shoes. Of course. Any particular way? A flicker of irritation. He used straight bars, never crossed laces. He said crossed laces looked careless. Arden wrote that down. Felix Quill admitted he had come to provoke Gideon. He was preparing an article about the collapse of the old East Pier 22 years earlier. 3 workers had died, including a 19-year-old apprentice named Thomas Calder, Maeve's younger brother. The official report blamed storm damage and poor maintenance, Felix said. But Gideon's company had replaced load-bearing brackets with cheaper stock. Someone altered the procurement records after the collapse. Proof? Bram asked. I had a source. Who? I protect sources. Even when someone is murdered? Especially then. Felix had left the reception room before 10, but instead of leaving the pier, he hid in a storage alcove and recorded conversations. He said Gideon met privately with Silas and later with Maeve. Let me hear the recordings, Bram said. Felix smiled without warmth. My recorder vanished from my coat pocket before the body was found. That made him either useful or inventive. Rowan Dacre's motive was simpler. Gideon's redevelopment plans would privatize the working harbor, end several fishing leases, and remove Rowan as harbor master. I told him the sea does not care who owns the paperwork, Rowan said. He told me the council did. Where were you after the rehearsal? On the West Quay. A trawler broke a stern line during the storm. Witnesses? 3 crewmen. All 3 confirmed it, though none could account for every minute. Rowan also knew every service passage under the pier. Could someone enter the Blue Vault without using the main door? Arden asked. No. The answer came too quickly. She waited. Rowan looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Not now. What does that mean? The old pier had specimen lifts when the lower rooms housed a marine laboratory. Crates went down from the filtration gallery. Those shafts were sealed during rebuilding. Sealed how? Concrete and steel. Did you inspect them? I signed the inspection. That was not my question. Rowan's silence became the answer. Juniper Shaw had supervised environmental approval for the attraction. She and Gideon had fought over the pumping system. The Blue Vault drew seawater through intake pipes and circulated it around the windows to prevent algae buildup. Juniper believed the intake endangered juvenile fish during spring tides. Gideon called every living thing an obstacle until it had a ticket price, she said. She left the pier just before 10 and walked to Greywake Aquarium, where motion sensors logged her arrival. She worked in the laboratory through the night. Alone? Bram asked. With 12,000 liters of seawater and a cuttlefish that dislikes me. Human witnesses? No. Silas Vane denied any serious disagreement with Gideon. His voice remained calm until Bram mentioned the old East Pier collapse. Then the solicitor's fingers tightened around his cane. Ancient litigation, Silas said. Settled long ago. Felix Quill says records were altered. Mr. Quill says many things because adjectives are cheaper than evidence. Did you alter them? No. Did Gideon? Silas looked up at the portrait. Gideon often confused survival with innocence. That was the first honest sentence he had offered. He and Livia had left together, but hotel footage showed Silas departing again through a side entrance at 10:40. He claimed he walked along chapel steps to clear his head. No camera covered the path back toward the pier. Maeve Calder came last. She had designed the Blue Vault exhibition and restored the objects displayed inside it. The missing diving weight had been in her care. 6 kilograms, she said when Bram asked. Cast brass around lead, stamped with the mark of the Harker Salvage Company. Could it kill someone? Anything can kill someone if grief gives it enough momentum. Bram paused. That sounds personal. My brother died under Gideon Thorne's pier. Did you meet Gideon alone last night? Yes. What about? He wanted an exhibit label removed. Which label? The one describing the East Pier collapse. What did you say? No. And he accepted that? Maeve gave a quiet laugh. You did meet Gideon, Inspector? She said their argument ended shortly after 10. She remained in the conservation workshop until nearly midnight, repairing a cracked display case. No one saw her, but a motion-activated work light recorded activity. Your knuckle, Arden said. Maeve looked at the scrape. Glass. From the display case? Yes. Which hand do you use for tools? My right. The scrape was on her left. After the interviews, Bram spread the statements across a dining table in the hotel's closed restaurant. Everyone hated him, he said. Not everyone lies the same way, Arden replied. Who worries you? Rowan lied about access. Silas lied about the old collapse. Felix lied by omission. Maeve lied about her hand. Livia may be lying about being alone. Juniper's alibi is a fish. Cuttlefish. Then we should interview it carefully. Unwritten arrived with preliminary findings. Gideon had not drowned. There was little water in his lungs. The head injury had killed him. Based on body temperature, early changes, and the state of the blood, death likely occurred between 10 and midnight. Ordinary forensic uncertainty, but enough to rule out the theory that he had entered the chamber alive at dawn. There were bruises on his wrists, suggesting he had been dragged or restrained. Fine black particles clung to his coat and trousers. His shoes were wet outside, but almost dry inside. And the laces? Arden asked. Anwyn slid a photograph across the table. Crossed. Someone else had tied them. The Blue Vault reopened to investigators that afternoon. The storm had pulled away, leaving a hard white sky. At low tide, the chamber windows looked out onto exposed pilings coated with weed and mussels. Arden examined every surface twice. Near the western bench, she found 2 parallel scratches in the floor, each narrow and crescent-shaped. They began beneath a removable wall panel and ended near the taped outline where Gideon's body had lain. Bram removed the panel. Behind it was not concrete. It was a steel shutter painted the color of the wall. Rowan swore when he saw it. You signed this as sealed, Bram said. I was told it had been filled from the gallery side. By whom? Gideon's contractor. The shutter had no handle on the chamber side, only recessed bolt heads. One corner bore fresh scratches. Arden photographed them and found a thread of dark red wool caught in the seam. Gideon had worn no red. Specimen lift, Rowan said, or what remains of one. They entered the filtration gallery from a locked door on the pier's lower service deck. The room stretched behind the Blue Vault, filled with pipes, pump housings, and electrical cabinets. At its far end stood a rusted rail cradle, large enough to hold a body. The cradle aligned with the shutter. It had been used recently. Black graphite grease shone along the runners. A torn strip of red wool clung to one wheel. Coarse salt had spilled beneath a sack labeled for dehumidifying the exhibit cases. The impossible room became possible in less than a minute. A killer could murder Gideon in the filtration gallery, place him on the cradle, roll him through the transfer opening, then enter the Blue Vault by the main door, arrange the scene, bolt the door, and leave back through the transfer opening. From the gallery's side, the shutter could be pulled closed with its maintenance cable. The problem was that the cable had been cut years earlier, or appeared to have been. Arden found a new length of clear monofilament tied to the end and routed through a drain channel. It led to the floor sump, where it had been severed and washed out with the overflow. Bram stared at the line. That looks like a mechanism. It is, Arden said, but not the clever part. What is? The room did not flood by accident. The seawater intake valve had been opened manually, yet the person who staged the scene had poured coarse salt around the plinth before opening it. The salt dissolved as water spread, making the flood smell and taste strongly marine, even though the first water released into the room came from a freshwater fire suppression tank. Why bother? Juniper answered when Arden showed her samples. Because real intake water contains larvae, algae, and suspended sediment, she said. Freshwater from the emergency tank would be clear. Salt made it seem like seawater at a glance, but the microscope tells the truth. Could the seawater valve have been opened later? Bram asked. Yes. Once the room filled high enough, pressure triggered the automatic equalization system. Then, harbor water entered. The first layer would still be freshwater. The killer had staged a leak without understanding the biology of seawater. That narrowed the field slightly. Juniper would have known, Rowan probably would too. Maeve, who handled dry exhibits, might not. But Arden resisted the shape of that conclusion. A fair mystery was not solved by one person's ignorance. It was solved by the total pattern of what they had touched, moved, feared, and misunderstood. The missing diving weight remained central. Police searched the pier and harbor. Divers checked beneath the blue vault. Nothing. Felix Quill's missing recorder surfaced first. A hotel maid found it behind a radiator in the ballroom. The casing was cracked, but the memory card survived. Felix had recorded 3 conversations. In the first, Gideon told Rowan that the harbor office would be demolished within a month. In the second, Silas said, "You cannot sell until the indemnity file is gone." Gideon replied, "It is already gone." In the third, Maeve confronted Gideon in the conservation workshop. Her voice was low and controlled. "You knew those brackets were wrong." "Your brother died in a storm," Gideon said. "He died because you signed for steel that was never installed." "You have no proof." "I have your ledger." A crash followed. Then Gideon said, "Give it to me." Maeve answered, "Come and take it." The recording ended. Bram ordered Maeve's arrest. Arden stopped him before he reached the door. For what? Motive, opportunity, argument, missing weapon from her exhibit, access to the transfer cradle, blood on the scene if we find it, and a recording someone conveniently stole, damaged, and left in the hotel where it would be discovered. You think it was planted? I think the murderer wanted us to hear it. Maeve could have planted it to make the recording look planted. That sentence is why detectives need sleep. Bram rubbed his face. What do you suggest? Find the ledger. They searched Maeve's workshop. The room smelled of wax, cloth, and metal polish. Tools hung in precise outlines. Restoration photographs covered one wall. On a central bench lay the cracked display case Maeve claimed to have repaired. The crack was old. Dust had settled inside it. Her alibi was false. In a drawer beneath the bench, officers found red wool fibers, a spool of clear monofilament, and Gideon's signet ring wrapped in tissue. Too much evidence, Arden thought. Not too little. Maeve was brought to the station. She admitted lying about the display case, but denied killing Gideon. I left the workshop, she said. I went to the old pump room. Why? Bram asked. To hide the ledger. Where is it? Gone. Who knew? No one. Then how did it vanish? Maeve looked at Arden. Because someone followed me. She said Gideon had grabbed her during their argument. She cut her left knuckle on a jagged mounting bracket while pulling away. That explained the scrape. She took the ledger and went through the service corridor to the old pump room, where she hid it inside a disused pressure tank. While there, she heard the filtration cradle moving. Did you investigate? Arden asked. I thought it was Gideon. He had keys to everything. I heard 2 people arguing, then a heavy strike. Voices? One was Gideon. The other was muffled by the pumps. Male or female? I could not tell. What did you do? I was afraid he had found me. I left through the seaward stairs. Why not tell police this morning? Because I had threatened him on a recording and hidden evidence of a corporate crime. I knew how it would sound. It sounded exactly like guilt. The midpoint of the investigation arrived with a second body that was not dead. Silas Vane was found unconscious in his car below chapel steps shortly after dusk. The engine was off. The driver's door stood open. A chemical-soaked cloth lay on the passenger floor, but Anwin determined he had been struck, not drugged. His cane was missing. Taped to the steering wheel was a page from Gideon's private ledger. On it were payments to a shell company controlled by Silas. When Silas regained consciousness, he claimed Maeve attacked him. She asked me to meet her, he said from his hospital bed. She said she had proof about her brother. When I arrived, someone came from behind. Did you see her? Bram asked. No. Then how do you know it was Maeve? She was the only person who knew about the file. Arden studied the bruise on Silas's temple. It was shallow and neat, the kind of injury that looked serious without being dangerous. His missing cane bothered her more. Gideon's wrists had been bruised by something narrow and hard. A cane laid across both arms could restrain a man if someone knelt on it. Silas's cane had a silver ferrule with a distinctive ridged pattern. Onwin compared the bruises. The pattern matched. Bram shifted his focus to Silas. Felix published a partial article online before police could stop him. Its headline accused Gideon and Silas of covering up the East Pier deaths. By morning, reporters crowded Harker's Cove. Protesters tied 3 black ribbons to the pier gates. Someone painted "Murder Built This Town" across the renewal board's office. Pressure changed the case. Witnesses remembered more because cameras were present, others remembered less. A fisherman reported seeing Livia on Cormorant Pier after she supposedly returned to the hotel. Hotel records showed her keycard entered her rooms, but anyone carrying it could have done so. Livia admitted giving the card to a receptionist and asking her to place a folder inside. "I went back to confront my father," she said. "I wanted him to sign the hotel shares into trust before the sale." "Did you find him?" Bram asked. "I saw someone in his coat entering the lower stairwell." "Someone?" "The lights were failing. I assumed it was him." "Did you call out?" "Yes." He did not turn. "What time?" "About 10:20. There it was. Ordinary alibi checking, not a trick. The time helped place Livia, but did not solve the murder. More important was what she had actually seen. "Describe the walk," Arden said. Livia frowned. "The walk?" "Your father had arthritis in his right knee. He favored it in bad weather." "Did the person limp?" Livia closed her eyes, returning to the corridor in memory. "No." Someone had worn Gideon's waterproof coat. A body double? Arden thought briefly. Then she rejected it as the complete solution. The sighting might misdirect the timeline, but the killer's central concealment remained the access route illusion and staged room. The figure in the coat was a supporting act, not the engine of the murder. The coat itself had been found on Gideon's body. If another person wore it, they returned it before staging him. Arden asked to see the coat. In the evidence room, she examined the lining. The right sleeve contained several strands of long, dark hair. Gideon's hair was short and silver. Maeve's curls were dark. So were Livia's. Juniper's was silver-streaked. Felix and Rowan wore theirs short. Silas had almost none. The laboratory would take time. Arden looked at the storm flap. One button had been re-sewn with bright blue thread. Livia recognized it. "I repaired that last winter." "Who could fit the coat?" "Most of them. Father wore it large." "Did he keep anything in the pockets?" "Mints, keys, a linen handkerchief. He hated paper tissues." The pockets contained keys and mints, but no handkerchief. A linen square turned up later in Rowan Dacre's harbor office, stained with brass polish. Rowan said it had been planted. Everyone said that by then. Arden returned alone to the filtration gallery near midnight. Bram objected until she reminded him the pier was guarded and she still had better low-light equipment than his entire department. The gallery's machinery produced layers of sound. Pump vibration, pipe knock, water hiss, the occasional deep boom of a wave striking below. Maeve had claimed she could not identify the second voice because of the noise. Arden stood in the old pump room and listened. From there, spoken words in the gallery were distorted. Low voices became almost indistinguishable, but certain sounds traveled clearly through the pipes. A cane striking steel, a ring tapping glass, a key bundle dropped on concrete. She recreated each. The cane produced a bright two-note chime. On Felix's recording, just before the crash in Maeve's argument with Gideon, Arden heard the same 2 notes. Silas had been nearby during that conversation. Perhaps he had followed Felix. Perhaps he had followed Maeve. Perhaps he had been protecting Gideon as he had for decades. In the filtration gallery, Arden found another clue beneath the cradle. A small half-moon of rubber, black on one side and gray on the other. It came from a heel insert. Gideon wore custom orthopedic inserts because of his knee. His shoes still contained both. Someone else had lost it. Bram collected footwear from all suspects. Felix complained. Rowan swore. Livia complied. Juniper asked whether the evidence bags were biodegradable. Maeve removed practical black boots with plain insoles. Silas refused until Bram obtained a warrant. His right shoe was missing a crescent-shaped heel lift. The fit was exact. Silas was arrested for Gideon's murder before sunrise. The evidence appeared coherent. He had motive to conceal the old fraud. His cane restrained Gideon. His heel insert lay beside the cradle. His voice may have been heard near Maeve's confrontation. He had returned to the pier after leaving Livia at the hotel. He knew about the indemnity file and the supposedly sealed specimen route. He could have staged his own assault to point toward Maeve. Even the missing diving weight made sense. Silas could have thrown it into deep water beyond the pier. Bram announced the arrest to the press. Arden watched from the station steps and felt the case settle around the wrong man. Not because Silas was innocent of everything. He was guilty of the old cover-up. He had altered procurement records, arranged settlements, and protected Gideon. He had also lied repeatedly. But the room beneath the pier contained a mistake Silas would never have made. Gideon's shoes. Silas had known Gideon for 40 years. He would have known how Gideon tied them. A stranger might cross the laces. A casual colleague might. But not Silas. Not Livia. Probably not Rowan, who had watched Gideon walk the harbor for decades. The person who retied Gideon's shoes after moving the body knew him well enough to hate him, but not intimately enough to know his small rituals. Maeve fit that description. So did Juniper and Felix. Yet Maeve had restored the diving weight and knew its exact mass. Juniper understood seawater too well to fake it with coarse salt. Felix knew almost nothing about the pier machinery. Arden needed the missing piece. She found it in an old photograph. The Harker's Cove archive occupied 2 rooms above the library, where radiators clanged and every folder smelled of dust. Maeve's restoration records included images of the Blue Vault before renovation. One showed the specimen cradle, the transfer shutter, and a wall-mounted rack containing 4 antique diving weights. 3 were round. 1 was rectangular. The missing exhibit weight was rectangular, with a brass shell and lead core. In the police photograph of Gideon's head injury, the wound was curved. The diving weight had not killed him. It was missing to make police assume it had. A misdirected weapon nested inside the staged room. Arden telephoned Anwen. Could the injury come from a round object? More likely than a rectangular one. The edge pattern bothered me, but swelling obscured it. What about a cane handle? Too light. A brass pressure cap? Possibly. Why? Because the filtration gallery contained 6 pump housings, each sealed by a circular brass inspection cap weighing nearly 4 kilograms. One cap had been replaced recently. Its surface was cleaner than the others. Its bolt threads carried fresh grease. The old cap had vanished. Arden checked the exhibit workshop inventory. Maeve had signed out metal polish and blackening solution, but someone else had access to the maintenance stores. Dr. Juniper Shaw, environmental supervisor for the pumping system. Juniper had understood the water. That seemed to exclude her from the coarse salt mistake. Unless the salt was not a mistake. Unless it was planted precisely because investigators would conclude the stager did not understand seawater. Arden drove to Grey Wake Aquarium. Juniper stood in the main tank gallery feeding strips of fish to the cuttlefish that disliked her. Blue light moved over her face. You arrested Silas, she said. Bram did. You disagree. I disagree with tidy evidence. Juniper dropped another strip into the tank. The cuttlefish changed from mottled brown to furious white. Animals prefer patterns, she said. Predators depend on them. Prey survive by breaking them. You helped design the Blue Vault's pumps. Yes. You knew the specimen route was not sealed. Juniper's hand stopped above the food tray. I knew the shutter existed. Did you tell Rowan? No. Why? Because Gideon ordered it retained as an emergency maintenance route. Rowan would have shut the attraction down. Who else knew? Gideon. Maeve. Eventually. Silas may have seen plans. You had access to the filtration gallery. So did half the construction team. Your laboratory motion sensor recorded you arriving before 10. Did it record you staying? No. You could have returned to the pier. So could anyone. Arden looked at Juniper's shoes. Flat soles, no missing insert. Her dark hair was streaked with silver and tied back. Long strands could have remained in Gideon's coat. Why did you hate him? Arden asked. I did not hate him. That is not believable. Juniper's expression sharpened. Hate is an inefficient allocation of attention. What did he do? He buried a contamination report. His dredging project released heavy metals into the nursery beds. We lost an entire season of juvenile bass. I threatened to go public. He threatened the aquarium's funding. Did you wear his coat? No. Did you place coarse salt in the Blue Vault? No. Did you kill him with a pump cap and remove a diving weight to misdirect us? For the first time, Juniper looked frightened. Not guilty, frightened. You found the cap, she said. Not yet. Then you should find Maeve before whoever killed Gideon does. Juniper opened a locked cabinet, and removed a waterproof folder. Inside was a copy of Gideon's ledger. Maeve gave this to me 2 weeks ago, she said. She asked me to authenticate entries relating to the East Pier steel. Yesterday, she said she had found the original inspection photographs. Gideon knew. If Silas is in custody, the person who needs that evidence destroyed is still free. Who? Juniper hesitated. Rowan. The harbor master had signed the modern inspection, claiming the transfer shaft was sealed. But 22 years earlier, Rowan had been a junior site supervisor on the East Pier. His signature also appeared on the delivery receipts for the missing steel. He had told everyone Gideon and Silas deceived him. The ledger suggested otherwise. The following scenes are integrated into the narration before the final confrontation to deepen the six suspect structure and provide additional fair play clues. On the second afternoon, Arden visited the Salt Glass Hotel kitchens because grief, she had learned, changed the way households handled ordinary things. Some people stopped eating. Some polished silver. Some gave away food as if generosity could keep death from returning. The head cook remembered Gideon's dinner untouched beneath a silver cover. He had ordered sole, potatoes, and bitter greens, then abandoned the plate after receiving a handwritten note. The note was gone, but the cook recalled the paper, cream stock with a blue deckled edge, the same stationery used by the Harker's Cove Renewal Board. Only Livia, Silas, and Rowan had easy access to it. The receptionist remembered Silas asking for an envelope shortly before he left the hotel again. Livia remembered Rowan carrying board stationery in his harbor office because Gideon expected him to distribute redevelopment notices. This clue did not prove who wrote the note. It established how Gideon had been drawn away without a telephone call that could later be traced. Arden next walked the route from the hotel to Cormorant Pier in each suspect's shoes, at least metaphorically. Livia took the lit promenade. Silas preferred chapel steps because the gradient was gentler on his hip. Felix used alleys to avoid being seen. Juniper crossed the aquarium yard. Maeve used the pier's service gate. Rowan moved wherever keys permitted. At the service gate, Arden found a recent scrape at knee height and a thread of gray wool. Silas wore gray. So did half the town. Under magnification, the thread contained fine, silver synthetic filaments used in reflective harbor uniforms. Rowan's sweater appeared plain by daylight, but under a flash it shone with the same fibers. He claimed he had brushed the gate during the afternoon inspection. That was possible. Good red herrings were not false. They were facts that could serve more than one story. Felix Quill proved more helpful when offended. He reconstructed his hiding place in the pier storage alcove and demonstrated how he had slipped his recorder beneath his coat. Arden asked why the third recording ended immediately after Maeve said, "Come and take it." "Because someone opened the alcove door," Felix replied. "Who?" "I saw only a hand." "Describe it." "Male, broad, scar across the thumb." Rowan had a rope scar across his right thumb. Silas had long, narrow hands. Gideon wore a signet ring on his left. "Why did you not mention this?" Bram asked. "Because I trespassed to obtain the recording." "You published allegations of murder but worried about trespass?" "I contain multitudes." Felix also admitted copying the audio before the recorder disappeared. His cloud backup preserved 4 additional seconds. In them, after the 2-note metallic chime, a voice whispered, "Not here." Audio enhancement could not identify the speaker, but Arden recognized the rhythm. Rowan used the phrase during his first interview when Bram asked about access routes. "Not here. Not now." He disliked direct denials. Juniper's laboratory offered another clue. The aquarium maintained samples from the Blue Vault intake during testing. Water collected the afternoon before the murder contained high levels of reddish silt after the storm. Water from the crime scene's first drain cycle contained almost none. The flood began with fresh water. That conclusion remained solid. Yet Juniper showed Arden something more subtle. The coarse salt from the floor included tiny fragments of dried lavender. "Exhibit desiccant," Juniper said. "Maeve mixes lavender with the salt sacks to discourage silverfish in textile cases." That pointed directly to Maeve's workshop. Or to someone who stole from it, Arden said. Maeve kept the salt in an unlocked service cupboard. Rowan had signed the weekly fire safety inspection and entered that cupboard 2 days earlier. Livia's secret emerged through money. She had transferred a large sum from the hotel reserve into a private account shortly before Gideon's death. At first, it looked like theft. In fact, she had paid deposits to buy employee housing before her father could sell it with the hotel. Gideon had discovered the transfer and threatened prosecution. "You could have lost everything," Arden said. "I was already losing everything," Livia replied. "There is a point at which risk stops feeling like a cliff and starts feeling like a door." Her motive was real. So was her grief, though she expressed it as anger because anger had been the only language Gideon respected. Silas's deeper secret was uglier. He had drafted settlement agreements for the families after the East Pier collapse. Each included confidentiality clauses and language implying worker negligence. He claimed Gideon insisted. "You wrote the sentences," Arden said. "I believed I was protecting the company, which protected the town. You protected the people who paid you." Silas looked older then. "At the time, I did not understand the difference. You understood. You preferred the explanation that let you sleep." That conversation convinced Arden he was capable of moral cowardice and elaborate concealment. It did not convince her he had killed Gideon. Silas outsourced harm. The murder required physical improvisation, knowledge of machinery, and the confidence to work while a storm shook the pier. Maeve's false alibi also contained a truthful core. She had not repaired the cracked display case that night, but she had repaired it earlier, using clear monofilament to hold a fragile panel while adhesive cured. That explained why spools were easy to steal from her workshop. Her red wool fibers came from a restoration blanket used to protect brass objects. Rowan had borrowed one during a safety drill, claiming he needed to cover an exposed pump motor. Maeve produced the sign-out sheet. His initials appeared beside the date. Bram stared at it. "Why did you not show us this before?" "Because you did not ask who borrowed a blanket," Maeve said. The answer irritated him because it was fair. Arden returned to Gideon's clothing. The dark hairs in the coat sleeve were not human. The laboratory identified them as coarse fibers from a Newfoundland dog's coat. Rowan kept a Newfoundland named Breen at the harbor office. Again, the clue was not decisive. Gideon had visited the office, but Livia insisted her father disliked dogs and never allowed Breen near him. Rowan, wearing Gideon's coat, would have carried the fibers inside the sleeve from his own sweater. The handkerchief found in Rowan's office carried brass polish matching Maeve's workshop, but it also held microscopic blue paint from the blue vault wall panel. Rowan said the handkerchief must have been planted. Arden believed the opposite. It had been dropped during staging, recovered by Rowan, and taken back to his office before police sealed the pier. Why leave it where a search might find it? Because guilty people did not always hide objects immediately. Sometimes they kept them close while deciding which explanation frightened them least. The most revealing interview occurred when Arden asked each suspect to draw the blue vault from memory. Livia drew the windows and central plinth but forgot the western wall panel. Felix drew the room larger than it was and placed the stairs on the wrong side. Juniper drew every intake and drain accurately, including the freshwater suppression line. Silas drew only the door, benches, and windows. Maeve drew the exhibit arrangement and the transfer shutter because she had restored it. Rowan drew the room as it existed before renovation. He included the specimen cradle rail continuing 6 feet farther into the chamber than the new plans showed. Then he crossed it out. "Habit," he said. The old rail length explained the crescent scratches in the floor. It also showed that Rowan knew the shutter had never been filled, despite signing otherwise. Arden did not confront him then. She wanted the complete structure, not another denial. She asked Onwin to re-examine Gideon's wrists. Beneath the broad pressure, bruises were narrow parallel marks containing traces of varnished ash wood and silver oxide. Silas's cane was ash with a silver ferrule. The cane had been used. The remaining question was, by whom? A hotel spa attendant remembered Silas changing shoes after a treatment because his socks were damp. He left his gray dress shoes outside the treatment room while taking a call. When he returned, he complained that the right heel felt uneven. He assumed the insert had shifted. The attendant had seen Rowan in the corridor at that time, delivering a redevelopment notice to Gideon. Rowan therefore had access to the shoes before the murder. He could wear them, lose the insert, and return them without Silas noticing in the confusion. Bram asked why Rowan would bother. "Because the filtration grease records tread patterns," Arden said. "Harbor boots have deep block soles. Silas's shoes have smooth leather. Rowan knew scenes officers would photograph the floor. He planned for forensic examination. He spent 22 years surviving inspections. He planned for paperwork, signatures, and visible traces. he did not plan for laces. The shoes became the smallest clue and the most human. Machinery could be studied, water could be manipulated, evidence could be planted. But personal habits belong to intimacy, and Rowan had mistaken public familiarity for private knowledge. Before the arrest, Arden visited the memorial at the end of the old East Pier foundation. 3 bronze plaques faced the sea. Someone had left fresh white flowers beneath Tomas Calder's name. Maeve stood there without a coat, letting rain darken her blouse. "I used to think finding the ledger would change the past," she said. "It changes who owns the story. Does that matter to the dead?" "No," Arden said. "It matters to the living people forced to carry a lie." Maeve looked toward Cormorant Pier. Rowan came to every anniversary. Guilt often dresses as devotion. "Do you think he killed Gideon?" "I think he has spent years deciding that staying made him better than the men who left. And now? Now he is running out of places to put the blame." The last supporting clue came from Elsie Marr, the cleaner who had first found the water beneath the door. Arden returned to her because first witnesses often remembered the scene as a feeling before they remembered it as evidence. Elsie said the tapping behind the glass had sounded irregular. Firefighters assumed it was Gideon's hand moving in the water. It was not. A loose brass label on the display plinth had been striking the acrylic as the fresh water level rose. Maeve had reported that label secure the previous afternoon. Rowan had removed and replaced it during his fire safety inspection, giving him a reason to handle the plinth and learn exactly where the missing diving weight would be displayed. Elsie also remembered a smell on the landing before the door was forced. Not only wet plaster, but the tarry scent of harbor grease. The specimen cradle runners used graphite grease mixed with pine tar. Rowan carried the same compound in the maintenance tin on his belt. The compound later appeared inside the cuff of Gideon's coat, where it could only have transferred while the coat was worn in the filtration gallery. Arden asked Elsie why she had not mentioned it sooner. "You asked what I saw," Elsie replied. "Nobody asked what the morning smelled like." That answer stayed with Arden. Investigations failed when questions became narrower than memory. A witness did not experience a crime as a list of admissible facts. She experienced cold water around her shoe, a locked door, an uneven tapping, and a smell that belonged somewhere else. Arden added the observation to the evidence map, not because it solved the case alone, but because it joined the other small failures in Rowan's construction. He had staged what people would see. He had not fully staged what they would smell, hear, or know through habit. That was why Arden understood, before the final call from Juniper, that Maeve was in danger. Rowan's identity depended on being the harbor's faithful guardian. The ledger did not merely threaten prison, it threatened the story he had told himself every morning for 22 years. People killed for money, fear, love, and rage. They also killed to preserve the person they believed they had been. Arden called Bram, no answer. She called Maeve. The phone rang out. At the station, an officer said Maeve had been released after Silas's arrest. She had returned to Cormorant Pier to collect personal tools before the council sealed the site. The tide was rising. Arden reached the pier as wind drove rain across the harbor. The police barrier lay on the ground. The guard's booth was empty. A smear of blood marked the door frame, but the officer was gone. She entered without waiting for Bram. The upper reception room was dark. Below, machinery groaned into life as the tide pressed against the intake system. Arden descended the spiral stairs. The blue vault door stood open. Inside, display lights flickered over the glass. Maeve's tool bag lay near the central plinth. The empty recess for the diving weight remained like a missing tooth. A sound came from behind the western wall. The specimen shutter sliding open. Arden stepped into the filtration gallery. Rowan Dacre stood beside the cradle with Maeve bound to it by electrical cable. His harbor master's coat was soaked. In his hands, he held the missing rectangular diving weight. Bram's absent guard lay conscious but dazed behind a pump housing. "Put it down," Arden said. Rowan turned. "You are not police anymore." "No, it improves my hours." Maeve's lip was bleeding. "He has the inspection photographs." Rowan glanced toward a metal drum near the sump. Flames licked through a bundle of papers inside. Arden kept her eyes on the diving weight. "That is not the murder weapon." "No?" "You removed it because it looked convincing. Heavy, antique, tied to Maeve's exhibit. But Gideon's wound was curved. You used an inspection cap from Pump 4. Rowan's expression barely changed. You cleaned the replacement too well, Arden continued. Maeve's polish made it easy. You planted her monofilament and fibers. You used Silas's cane to restrain Gideon after following him from the hotel. You lost Silas's heel lift beside the cradle because you were wearing his shoes. Maeve stared at her. Rowan laughed once. That is absurd. Is it? Silas left his shoes outside the hotel's treatment room after soaking his feet. Staff, remember, you stole them because your own harbor boots would leave a recognizable tread in grease. You wore Gideon's coat so Livia would see him walking after the confrontation. Then you returned the coat to the body. You tied Gideon's shoes because they came loose while you dragged him. Crossed laces. You knew his contracts, his routes, his weaknesses. You did not know his habits. The tide struck the pier. The gallery shuddered. You framed Silas with evidence of real crimes, Arden said. That is why it looked so persuasive. His cane did restrain Gideon, because you stole it after following him on chapel steps. His heel lift was here because you wore his shoes. The ledger page was genuine. His guilt made the perfect container for yours. Rowan's grip tightened on the weight. Maeve said, You signed the steel receipts. I was 24, Rowan snapped. Gideon told me the substitution was temporary. Silas said the calculations allowed it. My brother was 19. I know how old he was. The words broke something in Rowan's face. For 22 years, he had remained in Harker's Cove, maintaining the harbor, attending memorial services, helping the families of the men who died. Everyone had called him loyal, dependable, the one official who cared. Gideon had been preparing to sell the harbor and leave Rowan with no position, no protection, and no control over the old records. Maeve's ledger threatened to expose him, not as a deceived junior employee, but as a paid participant. I carried it all, Rowan said. Every storm, every inspection, every widow who asked whether the pier was safe. Gideon bought new houses. Silas bought silence. I stayed and held the place together. You did not carry the dead, Maeve said. You stood on them. Rowan raised the diving weight. Arden did not move toward him. She looked instead at the intake gauge. You opened the equalization valve, she said, the same way you flooded the blue vault. Rowan glanced involuntarily toward the panel. That was enough. Maeve drove both feet against the cradle's release pedal. The platform rolled forward. Rowan stumbled as it struck his knees. The diving weight fell, crashed through the grating, and vanished into the sump below. Arden pulled Maeve clear as Rowan lunged. He caught Arden's sleeve and drove her against a pipe. Pain flashed through her shoulder. Then the gallery door burst open and Bram entered with 2 officers. Rowan stopped fighting only when the rising water reached his boots. Later, the full reconstruction took weeks, but the truth was simple enough. Rowan followed Gideon after the rehearsal, wearing Silas's borrowed or stolen shoes to disguise his tread and carrying Silas's cane. He confronted Gideon in the filtration gallery about the redevelopment and the recovered ledger. Gideon threatened to expose Rowan as the only surviving official whose signature appeared on the fraudulent steel deliveries. They fought. Rowan pinned Gideon's wrists with the cane and struck him with the brass inspection cap. He then built the false story in layers. He dressed briefly in Gideon's oversized coat and allowed Livia to glimpse him entering the lower stairwell. He moved Gideon's body on the specimen cradle into the blue vault, retied a loosened shoe incorrectly, and placed the coat back on him. He bolted the main door from inside and exited through the transfer opening, drawing the shutter closed with monofilament. He opened the freshwater suppression tank, scattered coarse salt to mimic seawater, and relied on the automatic equalization system to admit real harbor water later. The staged flood suggested a catastrophic leak and focused attention on the locked room. He removed Maeve's diving weight to make it appear to be the weapon and planted materials from her workshop. He stole Felix's recorder, damaged it, and left it where police would hear Maeve threatening Gideon. Then, when suspicion began moving toward the hidden financial records, he assaulted Silas, planted a ledger page, and used Silas's missing cane and heel lift to complete the frame. His plan failed because every layer contained a different kind of knowledge. He knew the harbor machinery, but not marine biology, so his freshwater staging was detectable. He knew Gideon's public clothing, but not his private habits, so he crossed the laces. He knew the antique weight looked plausible, but not how its rectangular edge would differ from a curved wound. And he knew Silas was guilty enough to look like a murderer, but not innocent enough to become one. Silas Vane was released from the murder charge and arrested days later on charges connected to fraud, evidence tampering, and obstruction. He did not thank Arden. Men like Silas often mistook the correction of one injustice for forgiveness of all the others. Felix Quill published his investigation in full. For once, his headline contained no exaggeration. The pier was built twice, on Chep steel, then on silence. Juniper Shaw secured an independent environmental review of the harbor redevelopment. The project was suspended. Livia placed the Saltglass Hotel into a community trust, partly to save it and partly to ensure no single Thorne could ever gamble it again. Maeve Calder reopened the Blue Vault exhibition 6 months later. She changed its centerpiece. The antique diving weight recovered from the sump was displayed not as a weapon, but beside the original steel receipts and the names of the 3 workers killed in the East Pier collapse. Tomas Calder's name came first only because he had been the youngest. On opening morning, Arden stood at the back while schoolchildren pressed their hands to the glass and watched silver fish turn in the tide. The room remained dry. Bram joined her beside the western panel, now welded permanently shut. "You were right about lunch," he said. "You never bought it. I was distracted by murder." That excuse has a limited shelf life. He offered her a paper bag from the bakery downstairs. Cheese and pickle. Arden accepted it. Outside the glass, the harbor water darkened as a cloud crossed the sun. For 1 second, the children fell quiet. The blue vault seemed to sink deeper than it was, down through green water, through old wreckage, through every secret the town had waited and thrown away. Then the light returned. The fish flashed silver. And Harker's Cove, which had spent 22 years pretending the sea had taken the truth, finally admitted that people had buried it on land. Thank you for listening to The Unwritten Murder Files. If you enjoyed this complete mystery, please like the episode, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves an intelligent case with a fair solution. Your support helps us bring you more original stories. We'll be back next week with another case from the Unwritten Murder Files. Until then, listen closely. Every secret leaves a trace.